I'm not sure what's harder to quite fathom, that there's a congressman title in front of my name or that so many illustrious people show up to a party for me. I almost did the same thing you did. Congresswoman Underwood and I were discussing the other day how we have to introduce ourselves now by something other than our first names. So thank you all really so much for coming, all of you for being here. Thank you, Dan, for hosting us today. Linda, thank you for your words. I've lost track of how many forums and parades we've marched in, but it's always a pleasure to see you. And is Joe here as well? I'm sorry, I'll come right past you. Jack, thank you for your speech and your humor and an awful lot of it. And Senator Durbin, if there's someone with better policy chops and political savvy in Washington, I haven't met them yet. And you're truly a model, and I think all of us in this room are fortunate to call you our senator. Thank you. So, having never held or run for elected office before, you start out this process saying you have to take an oath on a constitution. And it's a peculiar thing, right? I've not had a job before where I had to start with an oath to anything, and I think most of us probably haven't. And it's worth taking, I think, a moment to ask why this particular job does. And not just why we take an oath, but why an oath on a constitution. It's not an oath to a god, it's not an oath to a president or a king, it's not even an oath to a government. It's just to a pretty short document with less than 5,000 words. It's a document that, it should be noted, is fairly imperfect. We've had to amend it 27 times, add another 3,000 words in the process. It's a document that can be frustratingly opaque, and maybe Judge Durkin has more wisdom than I do on this, but it seems like we've still got some questions about where the right to privacy ends or what that bit about a well-regulated militia means exactly. And it's a document that doesn't even claim to be perfect, in spite of what some people says. All it really says is a sort of aspirational note at the beginning about aspiring to a more perfect union. So why the oath? Because we're a country of laws. And the survival of our nation depends on nothing so much as our willingness to be bound by words. I think our founders, I think in their wisdom, a brave, courageous, and maybe naive idea. Kind of crazy. It is wildly at odds with how we live the rest of our lives. Gwen and Audrey may fantasize about a world where Kara and I will create a constitution that sets all the rules, and if they have sufficient supermajority power, they can impeach one of us. But that ain't gonna happen. So if we're gonna sustain that vision, I think we need to periodically revisit why we take the oath and what that idea is all about. But as I found myself thinking about it, you sit there and say, if we don't agree on exactly what the words mean and we keep amending it, then what are we taking an oath to? And what is our shared commitment? And I would submit to you that it's this: freedom and equality. The and is critical. It's the central thread of the Constitution. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, and secure the blessings of liberty, did ordain and establish that Constitution. Freedom and equality. It's right there in the first sentence. We can't have one without the other. Freedom for some without equality for all isn't freedom, and we fought a civil war to settle that point. Equality without freedom is communism. We fought a Cold War on that point. And it's not just the Constitution, right? Our founders' belief in the supreme power of words, what Sarah Vowell described our founders as the wordy shipmates. The first document they wrote wasn't in 1789. 13 years earlier, they had the audacity to write what I think could be described as a glorified memorandum that claimed that we were forced to declare our independence because of circumstances that compelled us to assume the separate and equal station to which we were entitled by nothing less than nature and nature's God. We are entitled to freedom no less than we are entitled to equality. The Declaration, as you may know, went on to list a few self-evident truths, and it's worth noting that there were several truths in there. I had a plural. The first was that one to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which sounds an awful lot like individual freedom. The second, though, of those truths was that governments are instituted among men to secure these rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's also a self-evident truth. So in other words, we're entitled to our individual freedom, our pursuit of individual happiness, but we achieve that freedom through our collective organization. There is no free to be me that exists independently of the equality of we. Now, I should be clear, for those of you who have seen me dance, I am not suggesting we are all blessed with equal talents. But we do have an obligation to ensure that we're all given an equal opportunity to make the most of whatever finite talents we may have. So you may see me dance again. And that's why we have to act on climate change. Because equal access to freedom is inseparable from equal access to clean air, clean water, non-flooded homes, and non-burning land. It's why we have to ensure that we have universal health care. You know, Tennyson, remember, he lamented that he said, how is it that nature's God, red in tooth and claw, provided such an equal distribution of miseries around the population, regardless of how good you were? Well, it seems to me that given an equal distribution of miseries, our government has an obligation to make sure that we also provide an equal distribution of medical care. It's also why a commitment is inseparable from a promise that no one be compelled to live according to the religious preferences of somebody else. Freedom for some is not equality for all. So, here we are today. There's men and women in the ads. We've got multiple genders, multiple sexualities, multiple races. Every one of us in this room has a right to freedom, but that individual right is preserved only as long as we never lose sight of our collective right to equality. Equal opportunity, equal treatment under the law, equal respect. And we've not always lived up to that goal, but we do always aspire to perfection. When Martin Luther King gave his famous last speech the day before he was assassinated about going to the mountaintop, at the start of that speech, he said, "The world's all messed up. The nation is sick and trouble is in the land." We can still say that today. But we can also still share his optimism that the future will be brighter, and so long as we retain our commitment to freedom and equality. So long as we acknowledge that that brave and crazy and naive idea that our country was founded on is sustained only if we work to protect it. So long as we realize that the idea has inspired not just Americans, but people all over the world who yearn to be governed by a government that's bound by a handful of words rather than a handful of men. And so long as we realize that we have an obligation to be the leading cheerleader and sponsor for that idea on the national stage. Now, let's at least acknowledge the elephant in the room. I ran for this office in no small part because I felt that our government was failing to recognize and appreciate those self-evident truths. Because I felt that our president was behaving more like King George than George Washington. And because I knew that our country was better than that. Now, I am pleased to report, as the senator pointed out, that the U.S. House of Representatives now has a lot of people in it who felt the same way. And we are healthier as a nation as a result, and not because of the individuals who were elected. We're healthier because of the masses of people who stood up in defense of those principles. And it is a beautiful thing. So my responsibility, our responsibility now is to live up to that promise. Your right to freedom, your right to equality exists because you're a human being. Not by virtue of your age, your political party, your race, your immigration status, your gender identity. The U.S. House of Representatives apportions its seats by virtue of the number of persons in the country without even considering their eligibility to vote, much less who they voted for. So if I'm not representing all of you, I'm not doing my job. But to do that, I need your help. I think we all need your help. Because there is nothing that obligates anyone in this room to willingly assent to the rule of law. The nation depends not on the governors, but on the consent of the governed. And if we lose that, we lose everything. So here's my request to you all. Today, I took an oath to the Constitution. Do me a favor, everyone in this room, do the same. Thank you.